Today I'll be talking about Freud's defense mechanisms and how they explain everyday behaviors like procrastinations, avoidance, and emotional reactions that we sometimes don't fully understand. My presentations follows three simple steps. First, I will introduce the guiding questions. Second, um, I will explain Freud's theory. And thirdly, I will share my personal view and how this applies in our modern world. Well, to, to begin with, I've chosen a little bit two few questions that will make us feel familiar a little bit with the topic, make us understand it better. And they are like, why is it so easy to delay tasks we know are important? Why do we procrastinate? Um, why do we sometimes react defensively or justify our actions without really thinking about it? Uh, why do small problems occasionally trigger emotional reactions that feel much bigger than they should? Mm, Question like this point toward a deeper psychological issue, which is what is the mind protecting itself from? And Freud believed he had an answer. Well, um, Freud argued that the mind protects us through what he called defense mechanisms. These are unconscious strategies used by the ego to reduce anxiety and internal conflict. He wrote, the ego must defend itself against painful ideas and affects. And he wrote this in his writing The Ego and the ID in 1923. This means defense mechanisms aren't deliberate choices. They happen automatically, almost like emotional reflexes. They help us cope, but mm, also distort reality. Well, before explaining the different mechanisms, it's important to clarify where they come from. Sigmund Freud introduced the major ideas: repression, denial, projection, and displacement. In his works like the interpretation of dreams, as already mentioned, the ego and the ID, and also repression. It is a study, his one of his studies. And he famously wrote in 1914 that repression is the cornerstone on which the whole structure of psychoanalysis rests. However, Freud never created a full organized list. His daughter, Anne Freud, later systematized them into a theory. In her 1936 book, The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense. But to make this completely clear, in short, the theory of defense mechanism is Sigmund Freud's. But the classification and organized lists are Anna Freud's. But taken together, this still is considered as a Freudian theory or a Freudian framework. Now, moving on. What are defense mechanisms? Defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies that protect the ego from anxiety, guilt, shame, and emotional conflict. They push uncomfortable thoughts or feelings out of our awareness, and everybody uses them. It's common. They are normal and often helpful, but sometimes. Uh, but when we rely on them too much, They can prevent us from dealing with problems directly. Uh, Now, here are the major mechanisms which I listed, which were listed by Sigmund Freud. Repression. Repression pushes painful or uncomfortable thoughts out of conscious awareness, out of our conscious awareness. And for example, a student might be stressed about failing but tells themselves they're fine. Everything's gonna be fine. They ignore it. The feeling doesn't disappear, but it just simply gets buried. Moving on, denial. Denial is refusing to accept a reality that feels threatening. And the classic example is ignoring deadlines or pretending the workload is manageable when it clearly isn't. Both mechanisms reduce discomfort, but at least temporarily. Now, moving on, rationalization. Well, this happens when we convince ourselves that our actions make logical sense, even when they are emotional or avoidance driven. And examples include I work better under pressure. The exam wasn't important anyway. I didn't want to do that assignment. And so on and so on. These these examples protect our self-esteem but stop us from understanding our real motivations. Well, the next one is projection. Projection is when we attribute our own feelings to someone else. If we feel insecure, we might assume someone else is judging us. It externalizes emotions we don't want to recognize in ourselves. And here are following three other mechanisms which are not that important but have their value: regression, displacement, and sublimation. Freud identified several more mechanisms. The first one was, regression. And under stress, a person may slip into earlier, more childlike behaviors. For example, emotional outbursts during exams. Displacement is redirecting emotions towards a safer or more convenient target. And for example, getting angry at a friend instead of facing the real source of stress. And sublimation, a healthier mechanism. It is turning difficult emotions into something productive, such as art, studying, or exercise. Freud considered this one as the healthiest one, the one that mm, is the most positive one. And now, how we can use this theory? Well, even though Freud wrote over a century ago, this theory is incredibly relevant. First, it helps us understand procrastination. It's often not laziness, but fear, avoidance, and anxiety, combination of all of these three factors. Secondly, it increases emotional awareness, and when we suddenly become defensive, recognizing the mechanism helps us slow down and, and understand what's really happening. Mm. And thirdly, it helps us break patterns. Once something unconscious becomes conscious, we can choose a healthier reaction, like how to cope with things. And last but not least, it improves the relationships. And two people projecting or denying or displacing or so on can create conflicts that feel mysterious or that you cannot follow them where they are going until you recognize the mechanism that it is used. Recognizing the mechanism will uh, improve relationships and help people communicate. And now, my personal overview. Personally, I think defense mechanisms are not scientifically exact. Freud worked before modern research methods existed, but the value of the theory isn't in its scientific precision. It gives us a language to understand complex emotional behavior, and also it is valuable for understanding stress, avoidance, and relationships. In conclusion, we started with the question of why we procrastinate, avoid tasks, and react emotionally. Freud's theory of defense mechanisms gives us a meaningful explanation. The mind protects itself from discomfort by distorting or redirecting emotional experiences. By becoming aware of these mechanisms, we gain better control over our thoughts, behavior, and reactions. And even though Freud wrote more than a century ago, his ideas about the mind remain surprisingly relevant. Thank you for listening. And here is the bibliography.